it does have a little bit of a lag compared to the Zoom meeting. No. Okay, now I just got to figure out how to turn that off. Okay. We'll give everybody a few more minutes to get on to this one. And okay, we'll just give everybody else a little bit of a chance to get on before we get started. Sorry about this, guys. Just trying to get up. So what I'm going to do during all of the talks, I will be monitoring the hash GIB to 2020 MEL hashtag. So if you have anything you can't get a hold of me through the question and answer window on Zoom meeting, then basically tweet it on that hashtag and I'll watch that. So let me stop sharing my screen real quick and just do a quick introduction. And see why. Don't I have my camera? Okay, welcome this morning. I'm going to switch cameras real quick and flip around. Welcome everyone to the 2020 Global Integration Bootcamp from Melbourne. I am sorry that we're not sitting in person to see everyone, but with the COVID-19 virus and just a lot of companies starting to put a lot of restrictions in place, there is not wasn't a lot of choice. So I did a lot of discussions with both my company and with the folks that were going to hold it, Excello, and with Microsoft, and we decided the best option would be to do an online event. So, and it's a holiday weekend too here in Melbourne, just because we needed to do it before the MVP Summit. But as that turned out this week, the MVP Summit also got turned into an online event. So I would like to thank a few people before we get started. 6Pivot for their support. We're using their Zoom meeting subscription. Also, I have got the setup I've got here. You can kind of see in the background a little bit. I have a video switching device that Roland has lent me to do the event. It was going to be a lot more useful when we were actually in person because it can handle 3 inputs. But I'm using it right now with my digital camera just so that you can see me on the screen. But basically, what we're going to do is we've got the sessions laid out. They're 45-minute sessions. We will be doing about a 15-minute break between sessions. That gives us time for some questions. Use the Zoom question window. I'll have that open and monitoring that while the other presenters are presenting. There is a different Zoom meeting for each one. It was just going to be easier to record and easier to get back to if we had an issue during that. I'm also going to monitor, like I said, the GIB 2020 MEL hashtag on Twitter. So if you have anything there, most of you also probably know my email address. So if you do have issues, I've got my second laptop, as you can see, kind of sitting over in this side that I'll have open with things like that. I've got the main screen, and then I've got monitors there to monitor. I do have my coffee already, so hope everybody had a chance to grab a cup of coffee before we get started. So basically, I think on that point, if there's nothing else that we need to do, I will get on to doing the first topic. Again, I've got the question and answer window open. So if there's anything that people have, we did do a volume check earlier to make sure that you could hear me okay. So we will get started from there. Thank you very much. Yeah, I noticed that just then. I'm going to go to stop the video, start the video back up. Okay, so there, But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go quickly and bring up my, before I share the screen, let me just go and bring up the first slide deck. Oh, actually, I have to. Let me just share the screen first because the slides take over the screen. There we go. So just quickly, can somebody just respond in the question window to see if they're that's okay for that? Okay, so. Okay, so that should be good. So is the audio still all right? Can somebody just quickly type in that before we get started? Yep, okay. So welcome again to the Global Integration Bootcamp. Again, an online event this year. Hopefully next year everything will have settled down enough that we can do an in-person event like we had. But again, I think that as we are seeing in a lot of the other events, a lot of the online events are being canceled for the either not being replaced with an online event or being postponed or turned into an online event. Now, one of the things I will offer to people is that if you are interested in trying to get into doing online events, just let me know. I can talk you through how I'm doing this one and basically an easy way to get started on those. So let's go ahead and get started. And okay. Oh, sorry, just a second. Let me go and fix my slide deck. Because I had two decks, one that basically just has the slide in it. So let's go and do this one. That's the Keynote. There we go. So my name is Bill Chestnut, as most of you probably know, and basically I wanted to have just a quick talk here about the state of integration. And I think that early on, this used to be kind of just fairly BizTalk centric, but now we're going to talk about a lot of the other technologies around, so that basically gives us a lot better of a option to for our integration. Here are my details. Again, there, if you need to get a hold of me during the day, you can always use that email address. So I'll be monitoring pretty much most of those. There's the Twitter handle. That's what the Twitters are going to be going out over for the meetings. So the agenda I want to talk about with the state of integration is basically on-premise. So where are we at in terms of on-premise integration? I want to talk about also about Azure. And a little bit different this year is I want to talk about some of the other clouds. So where are we at? How can we leverage some of the technologies that we have to basically do some of the other clouds? So for on-premise, I'm not sure the people that aren't really into BizTalk and more of Azure wouldn't be probably aware that BizTalk Server 2020 released not long ago. That basically is the next installment in the BizTalk server family. It's interesting. It's a 20-year-old product now because I started on BizTalk Server 2000, a vastly different product than it is today. But basically, the BizTalk Server 2020 has support for the latest operating systems, the latest SQL, things like that. They have deprecated, some of the adapters that were deprecated are still deprecated. But again, BizTalk server, I get a lot of questions about, is it dead? Things like that. And I guess my best answer is that it does have some workloads that it handles very, very well still. One of the ones that I see is in the healthcare environment. Everything is typically still on premises or inside of their network as opposed to the cloud. There is some work being done around that to get more of that to the cloud, but currently the BizTalk is a really good tool because it's got an HL7 adapter and the components to do HL7. A few years ago, I saw a talk by HCA Healthcare in the US, and it was that they were processing 60 million messages a day through their BizTalk infrastructure. Mind you, that wasn't a single BizTalk server. It was I think it was five BizTalk groups, and each one of those groups had 5 to 7 BizTalk servers in it. But basically, there still is a market for BizTalk server in those environments. So it is still viable from my point of view if your integrations are inside of your network and not in the cloud. So yep, but I guess the interesting one that's on this slide is containers. So one of the things that has happened in pretty much the last 12 months is the fact that a few of the products that we're used to using in Azure are now containerized. We have talks later on today about running the API management gateway in a container. So I'll leave most of that for them. But basically, this gives us an option if there are things that we need to do in our environment. We have an option to go with containers. And pretty much what else I can say on the container side of things is to watch this space, because I think the interesting change that I have seen is that it looks like some of the Microsoft technology that's in Azure is opting for containerizing the applications instead of putting them fully on stack. So if you're familiar with Azure Stack, it's the Azure data center you can run in your own data center on machines supplied by either Dell, HP, or Lenovo, and it allows you to run that Azure functionality. But what we've seen is, I think functions were the first one that took off and adopted containers. And the container adoption initially was driven by the IoT edge. They had a desire to be able to do some compute with functions in the edge. So basically, to do that, that edge components were running in containers. So they needed to get the functions running in containers. Now, one of the interesting side effects of that is, as soon as they got it running in containers for IoT Edge, is now, are they going to expand that container use to basically cover the whole container ecosystem? So run it in Azure, the AKS, run it in any other cloud in a container service, run it on your desktop in Docker desktop, run it inside of your on-premise network in containers. Now, I had some interesting discussions with a few people at the Ignite tour in Sydney, and we've kind of come to the conclusion that the containers are really filling the space for virtual machines. And so, and some of the discussions we had was around the fact that we've gone from virtual machines to PaaS services, so functions running in app service plans, so we didn't have to manage anything. Now we're coming back to containers where it's more of an IaaS play. It's not quite virtual machines and what you have to manage, but it does feel a lot like going back to the IaaS side of things. So, but I think the flexibility that it gives us, because there's very few companies at the moment that are fully in the cloud. So I think there's going to be a situation where to do that transition from the on-premises data centers and things like that into the cloud, that these containers are going to play a good option, because I can start writing code with functions and using API management in containers, and then be able to move that to the cloud and not have to change my code. And that's going to be a really beneficial piece for a lot of companies, I think, so that they don't see that they're doing a lot of code that can't be reused. So that's really going to be good. So on-premise, basically, we still have our web API and all of those things that we've done in the past on-premise. But I think that we do have options still around BizTalk Server, and we're getting more and more options around the containers. So let's go to the next one. So now, Azure. Okay, so we got a few more things on the slides here. I've got a talk later on this afternoon on the some of the DevOps side of that, and basically we will work from through some of those things later on. But basically, we've got logic apps. Logic apps are available in Azure. We can use those to do orchestrations similar to what we did with BizTalk. And I guess I might as well start with the first topic that I keep running into with a lot of customers, is that BizTalk was a single product, on-premise product. There's no reason you can't run it in virtual machines in Azure, but it's still an on-premises product as far as my feeling about it. But there's not a single product in Azure for integration. Some of the competitors call their products cloud, but really just run them in virtual machines behind the scenes. So they tend to look like they can run anywhere, but it's still a virtual machine that's being consumed. For Azure, we've got a group of products. So we've got logic apps, we've got API management, we've got service bus, we've got event grid, we've got functions. And if you don't understand where Key Vault fits in this picture, my talk later on today at 2:30 will kind of shed some light on my feelings around Key Vault. So, and we also have our web apps and things like that. So again, they pretty much play across all of those. Logic apps, they've done a bit of work on those with a lot more connectors and things like that, and making some of the connectors easier to deploy with Azure DevOps. The API management, the one big piece that they've done, or a couple of big pieces they've done this year. One is now you have a fully customizable developer portal. So basically you can use the one they supply, or you can actually host the developer portal in a static website of your own. So you can do all of your varying degrees of customization, make it look just like your other websites, make it interact with your existing sites for the developers, because basically you can delegate the authentication to your own auth provider, things like that. So, and the second thing is they've done a lot of work in getting the gateway to run on a container. So that means if you've got APIs that are being used in Azure, and basically a lot of people consuming those from Azure, but you've also got some internal projects inside of your own data center that need to call off to APIs. And again, part of a transition strategy, I think, is that we get those on-premise products using the gateway, running inside of a container inside of your on-premise data center or hosted data center, wherever you have it. and then they can either call back to, they can call to, typically you'd use the gateway when you want to call back inside of your on-premise network. So if you're calling APIs that live in your on-premise data center, you don't want to go all the way out to Azure, to the API management, and then come back in. So you want to use that gateway running in a container inside of your network. So that will shortcut that process. But once you get your application starting to use API management and the gateways, you can easily say, okay, we're now going to pick those APIs up that are on premise. We're going to put those in Azure. The applications that are consuming those no longer have to worry about the ability to call those, because now they still call them through API management the way they were calling them. So that makes a big difference, I think, around that. So there are a few of these other products that they're looking at containerizing. So you'll just have to watch the space on that. And then at the bottom, I've also mentioned containers. So one of the things that I started noticing on a few of the tenders that we got at 6Pivot was that people were actually calling out that as part of their integration strategy, they wanted containers. So, and when I first saw that, I was going, I'm not sure exactly how they're going to use that, where it's going to fit. I did run into a couple of customers that didn't know exactly how they were going to use the containers, but somebody had put together the RFP for them and specified containers. So at first I kind of was, somebody's trying to make their RFP buzzword compliant, so they've put containers in there. But as it turns out, one of the things that has been hard to do in Azure is to get your web apps and your functions and things like that to run inside of a VNet. They've got ways that you can connect your app services to a VNet, and that's typically for one-way traffic. So the app service running can connect into the VNet and then basically be able to get access to data inside of the VNet. And then ultimately, if you have a VPN or express route inside of your network. But what it turns out, it looks like, is that the containers, the AKS service in Azure requires a VNet. And then you can deploy your functions inside of that VNet, or by deploying them into that container. And the side effect of that is the fact that the existing way we had to do that was through an app service environment, which was extremely expensive for those people that tried to go through that approach. You had to set up your own set of front-end servers, your own set of back-end servers. You needed all of that configuration and things like that. And you needed to do all of that inside of your VNet. So it became a very expensive proposition. If I had a lot of websites, it wasn't bad. But if I had one or two, it was a very expensive approach to doing a application inside of a VNet. So, and again, they've gone a little bit further now to make some of it easier. Is they've now got some service endpoints, and they're working on some other stuff, private link and things like that, to make it easier to connect from your VNet to things like SQL and storage and things like that that aren't able to be put inside of a VNet. So they're doing a little bit more work there, but what I see is I do see a place now for the ability to run your functions in a container in AKS inside of your VNet. So that may be the solution for several people to be able to do some of that, to get things inside of the VNet where they want them. There was also some work, I think, recently on some of the app service plans, and I haven't had a chance to completely read the announcement. But one of the issues that a lot of customers had is that you could control the inbound traffic to the app service plans, but you couldn't actually control any of the outbound traffic. They are doing some work around the ability to be able to force the outbound traffic from an app service through proxies so that you can look at the outbound data and things like that. This is for those companies that were interested in being able to make sure that no data was kind of escaping from their network. So other than that, those are the kind of the products, in my opinion, that make up the integration suite in Azure. There's a few other ones that you're going to use from time to time, event hubs, SQL database. They all make up that kind of integration, what you would use in Azure. And I guess for me, the fact that we don't have a single product in Azure is probably actually more beneficial than a downfall. And the reason is why is that most of these services that I'm getting are consumption-based services. So if I don't use them or I don't use a lot of them, I'm not paying a high price. Where some of the competitive products where you do buy a service, you have to pay for that service no matter what features, what pieces you're using of that. So you can definitely get started a lot easier in the Azure integration. You can spin up a single logic app. You can spin up your API management. There's consumption services there now that we can use API management. I just did read that there's a new tier of Cosmos DB that is on the low tier that is free. So there are a few things there now that they've done around making getting started with these products a lot easier. And like I said, with the Key Vault, later on today, I've got to talk about how to leverage Key Vault and make a lot of your deployments and things like that a lot easier. Now, quickly, what we're going to I'll talk a little bit about some of the other clouds. So one of the advantages now of Azure Functions running in containers and API management as another one that runs in the gateway runs in containers is that I can now run those on pretty much any cloud that supports a container. I can deploy my functions to. I can basically use those. And I've always held that if I have an application that really wants probably 5 nines or better in terms of availability, I need to be in multiple clouds. So this containerizing of the functions may be the easy way for me to achieve that, because I can now run those containers in those other clouds and be able to achieve that higher availability, protect against a particular cloud having issues, as opposed to just a data center having issues. So I think that is going to be one of the things. But I do think there is a little bit of a learning curve. I know that I've been reading some stuff about KEDA, K-E-D-A, KEDA, and that's kind of a piece that sits on top of the Kubernetes to basically help with scaling. So figure out when we need more machines in that cluster, things like that. Again, that feels to me a lot like we're going backwards from our PaaS services into IaaS, where we need to deal a bit more with how we scale and things like that. So, but I have kind of decided to bite the bullet, and I'm started running Docker Desktop on my laptop, and I'm gonna basically spend some time putting together a training course. I've got a course around cloud integration that does API management, logic apps, functions, things like that. but I think that there is a space in there for developers that haven't used containers in the past to basically, here's how we get started with containers. Here's how we can leverage containers for our functions. And basically, here are the good and the bad side of doing that. So I think that's going to be a very important technology for a lot of developers. So again, as saying that is that I think that probably if you're in that integration space right now, that containers are going to become more important to you for those hybrid scenarios where you've got stuff in both Azure and an on-premise data center or another cloud. The other topic that's on there is cloud events. And I'm not sure how many people have heard of cloud events. It's from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. It looks and feels very much like Event Grid. So the big difference is that it's multi-cloud. It's supposed to be supported across a lot of the different clouds. And it has a slightly different payload format. Again, it still works the similar way to the Event Grid, where you've got some header values and then you've got a data payload. That pretty much is the same with cloud events. It's got some header information, and then it's got that data payload that basically you can make up yourself. So this, in conjunction with functions running in containers, we could leverage cloud events to be able to make our solutions multi-cloud a little bit easier. The Event Grid engine in Azure supports basically ingestion of cloud events and the output of cloud events. So when you set up your Event Grid, you can say what my inbound schema is and what my outbound schema are for the subscriptions, so that you can start working with cloud events. The cloud events 1.0, it had been in beta before that. The 1.0 came out, I think, 3 or 4 months ago. And it was very quickly, the Azure Event Grid started supporting that version of the events. So I didn't want to spend too much time on this because I could have gone on for most of the day on all the things that have changed in the cloud. But what I did want to do is just call out that one of the things you have to get used to in the cloud world is everything changes all the time, which I think is a little bit daunting, starting from like, I can remember back when I started working with .NET 1.0, it was pretty easy to get your head around most everything in .NET. Azure, when it started, it was pretty easy to get your head around the cloud services, web roles, worker roles, storage, SQL. There's just so many things out there right now. You pretty much do have to dedicate some time to basically keeping up with how things are changing. That URL that's in there is a good one to go look at some of the updates, and then also follow some of the different blogs. I know API management guys do a good job of putting out what their monthly updates are. And that's, I guess, another thing to mention is that with a lot of our on-premises products, you didn't get updates that often. So you didn't have to worry about updates and things like that as much. But now with the cloud scale of things, things are being updated very, very regularly. Some are even running less than 30-day updates. So the API management guys pretty much do it on a monthly basis. A few of the other ones do it at different time frames. I know Azure DevOps, they tend to release stuff pretty much monthly, but it's not everything at once. So they've done a really good job of using feature switches to turn things on as they need to. So pretty much that's what I wanted to cover. I finished a little bit early, but I didn't, the schedule was kind of more the fact that we were going to get started in the on-prem, in the location and have people coming in during that. So Are there any questions? You can use the question and answer window there to post any questions you had. If not, what we're going to do is I will break off this Zoom call. The tweet went out a few minutes ago for the next session. And so basically what we will do is we'll get the next speaker ready to present, and then we will start up at about 9:30. So does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, thank you very much for attending this first talk. We will be back at around 9:30 to get on to the next topic. I didn't, as part of the schedule for today, for the online schedule, I didn't actually leave time for like morning tea and lunch and things like that, because I figured the 15-minute gaps between the sessions would give people the ability to go off and do what they needed to do in those times. And also, I figured that because they're all going to be recorded and put up on YouTube, which I will send out to all of the attendees after the event where they're going to be. I've sent the live stream link out there, but I will do a little bit of cleanup on them and put them out there at another location when we're done. And that way people, if they weren't interested in a particular topic, could go off and do other things and come back and pick up the topics they want, or pick them up later on if they needed to be somewhere today. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will end the meeting here. Let's see. There are no questions. Let's see and I will end the meeting. Thank you very much. We will be back in a few minutes.